Captain Richard Keller had seen his fair share of strange assignments during his 15 years with the Galactic Coalition's Transport Division. From escorting delicate biological specimens to transporting high-ranking political refugees, his service record was filled with missions that defied conventional explanation. But as he stared at the classified orders flashing on his personal terminal, he couldn't shake the feeling that this particular assignment was different. Something didn't add up. "Captain, the Colonel is requesting your presence in the command center," Lieutenant Eliza Jackson announced from the doorway of his quarters, her expression carefully neutral. At 32, Jackson had served under Richard for the past 3 years, and he trusted her more than anyone else aboard the Artemis. "Did he mention what this is about?" Richard asked, already knowing the answer. "No, sir. Just that it's urgent." A slight furrow appeared between her brows. "And, sir, there's a shuttle docking in Bay 3. Not scheduled." Richard nodded, his suspicions deepening. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll head there now." The corridors of the Artemis hummed with the familiar vibrations of a ship preparing for departure. Tomorrow they were scheduled to begin a routine cargo run to the Centauri colonies. Nothing that would require the presence of Colonel Harris, who rarely left Central Command except for matters of exceptional importance. When Richard entered the command center, he found Harris standing with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him as he gazed at the holographic display of local space traffic. "Colonel," Richard greeted, snapping to attention. Harris turned, his weathered face set in grim lines. At 60, the Colonel's hair had gone completely white, but his eyes retained the sharp intelligence that had earned him his reputation as one of the Coalition's most formidable strategic minds. "At ease, Captain." Harris motioned to a nearby console. "What I'm about to share with you is classified level alpha. No questions, no records." Richard's unease increased. "Understood, sir." Harris activated the console, bringing up a set of coordinates. "Your cargo run to Centauri has been canceled. Instead, you'll be transporting a single passenger to Proxima Station. These are your new flight coordinates." "A single passenger, sir?" "Yes. A VIP who needs to reach Proxima without attracting attention." Harris tapped the console again, bringing up a blank passenger manifest. "You won't be logging this passenger in your official records. As far as command is concerned, you're running a special equipment transfer to Proxima's research division." Richard frowned. "Sir, with all due respect, that violates at least 6 Coalition transport protocols." "I'm well aware, Captain." Harris's tone hardened. "These orders come directly from Admiral Chen's office. Do you understand what that means?" Richard nodded slowly. Admiral Chen was the head of Coalition's Special Intelligence, an organization whose mandate extended beyond the normal chain of command. If Chen was involved, this was no ordinary transport mission. "The passenger is arriving now," Harris continued. "Your orders are simple. Deliver her safely to Proxima Station, avoid all unnecessary contact with other vessels, and maintain complete confidentiality. The success of this mission is paramount to Coalition security." "Her, a woman." Richard filed away this small detail as Harris handed him a data chip. "This contains everything you need to know," Harris said. "Review it in private, then destroy it. The Artemis departs in 2 hours." Before Richard could respond, the command center doors slid open and 2 figures entered. The first was a tall, muscular man in the black uniform of Special Intelligence, his hand resting on the disruptor at his hip. But it was the second figure that captured Richard's attention completely. She was humanoid, but unmistakably alien. Standing about 5.5 feet tall, her slender frame was draped in a hooded gray cloak that concealed most of her features. But as she moved forward, the hood shifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of her face. Her skin was a pale lavender hue, smooth and almost luminescent, with faint patterns that seemed to shift beneath the surface. Her eyes, large and almond-shaped, were a startling silver that reflected the command center's lights like tiny moons. "Captain Keller," the intelligence officer said, "this is your passenger. You're to address her as Naren." Naren's gaze met Richard's, and he was struck by the weariness in those alien eyes, and something else. Fear? Defiance? He couldn't quite place it. "I'll ensure she reaches Proxima safely," Richard said, addressing both Harris and the intelligence officer. "See that you do," the officer replied coldly. He handed Richard a small metallic case. "Her medical requirements. She'll explain if necessary." With that, the officer turned and left, without another word, leaving Naren standing beside Colonel Harris, who seemed unusually tense. "The Artemis is ready for immediate departure," Harris said. "I suggest you get underway as soon as possible, Captain." Richard nodded, sensing the dismissal. "Yes, sir. If you'll come with me," he added, addressing Naren directly for the first time. She inclined her head slightly, but remained silent as she followed him from the command center. As they walked through the corridors toward the officers' quarters where she would be staying, Richard became acutely aware of the curious glances from passing crew members. An alien passenger was unusual enough, but one arriving under such mysterious circumstances was bound to generate speculation. "These will be your quarters during the journey," Richard explained as they reached a door near his own cabin. "It's not luxurious, but it's private. No one will enter without your permission." Naren finally spoke, her voice soft but clear, with an unusual melodic quality that suggested her vocal structures were different from humans. "Thank you, Captain. How long until we reach Proxima Station?" "4 days, assuming we don't encounter any delays." She nodded, seeming to relax slightly now that they were alone. "4 days," she repeated, almost to herself. "Perhaps enough time." "Enough time for what?" Richard asked, his curiosity piqued. Naren looked up at him, and for a moment, he thought she might actually answer. Instead, she simply said, "To rest." "It's been difficult." Before he could respond, the ship's communications system chimed. "Captain, to the bridge," came Jackson's voice. "We've received clearance for departure." "I'll be right there," Richard replied. He turned back to Naren. "Please make yourself comfortable. If you need anything, use the comm panel by the door." As he headed for the bridge, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that he had just become involved in something far more complex than a simple transport mission. The mysterious passenger, the unusual security measures, the direct involvement of special intelligence. It all pointed to something significant and potentially dangerous. What he didn't know then was just how dangerous things were about to become. The Artemis slipped away from the station smoothly, its powerful engines propelling it into the depths of space. From the captain's chair on the bridge, Richard watched as the station diminished into a gleaming speck against the blackness. Next to him, Lieutenant Jackson was running through the pre-jump checklist with practiced efficiency. "All systems nominal, Captain," she reported. "We're clear for hyperspace insertion in 3 minutes." Richard nodded, his mind still partially occupied with thoughts of their unusual passenger. "Once we're in hyperspace, set course for the Hades Nebula." Jackson looked up sharply. "Sir, that's not the most direct route to Proxima." "I'm aware, Lieutenant. It's a security precaution." It was also a hunch. If this mission was as sensitive as Harris had implied, taking a less predictable route might be prudent. "Yes, sir." Jackson returned to her console, but not before giving him a look that said she knew there was more to this mission than she was being told. Richard couldn't blame her for being curious. In her position, he would be too. But orders were orders, and right now, his were to get Naren to Proxima Station with a minimum of fuss and attention. As the Artemis entered hyperspace, the stars outside elongated into streams of light before vanishing altogether, replaced by the swirling, iridescent patterns of hyperspace. Richard rose from his chair. "You have the bridge, Lieutenant. I'll be in my quarters reviewing our course." "Aye, Captain." In the privacy of his quarters, Richard inserted the data chip Harris had given him into his personal terminal. A series of files appeared, most heavily encrypted. The first to open was a brief personnel file on Naren. Species, Luminari. Home system, classified. Age, equivalent to human 25, approximate. Status, protected asset. Security level, alpha. Notes, subject possesses unique physiological traits requiring minimal exposure to standard lighting. Avoid medical scans unless absolutely necessary. Subject is not to be questioned about origins or abilities, ***. The file contained startlingly little information for someone being transported with such high security measures. Richard frowned, opening the next document, a brief mission statement that essentially reiterated what Harris had already told him. Get her to Proxima. Avoid detection. Maintain secrecy. The final document was a warning. Be advised that hostile elements may attempt to intercept the Artemis. Trust no one outside your immediate crew. In the event of emergency, passenger Naren's safety takes priority over all other considerations. Richard sat back, considering the implications. Whoever Naren was, she was important enough that Special Intelligence was willing to risk a coalition vessel and crew to transport her secretly. And someone out there might be willing to attack them to get to her. His musings were interrupted by the ship's alert system. Captain to the bridge, Jackson's voice came through, tense. We're tracking an unidentified vessel on an intercept course. By the time Richard reached the bridge, the situation had escalated. On the main view screen, a sleek black ship was visible, moving fast on an approach vector that could only be deliberate. They're not responding to hails, Jackson reported as Richard took his seat. How they find us so quickly? Richard muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Tactical analysis? Unknown design, but the energy signature suggests Krell technology, reported Ensign Tomas from the tactical station. They're armed, sir. Disruptor banks powering up. The Krell Empire, a militaristic regime that had been engaged in a Cold War with the Coalition for decades. If they were involved, this mission had just become significantly more dangerous. Shields up. Evasive pattern Delta. And get us back into hyperspace now. Richard ordered. The bridge crew moved with practiced precision, but they weren't quite fast enough. The Krell vessel fired, a brilliant beam of energy slicing through space toward them. Brace for impact, Richard shouted. The Artemis shuddered violently as the beam struck its shields. Warning lights flashed across the bridge consoles. Shields at 60%. Tomas called out. Minor damage to the starboard engine nacelle. Return fire. Target their weapons systems, Richard commanded. Lieutenant, how long until we can re-enter hyperspace? Drive is cycling, Captain. 2 minutes minimum. Another impact rocked the ship. This time, several consoles sparked, and the lights flickered momentarily before the backup systems engaged. Shields at 40%. Tomas reported. Sir, they're moving to cut off our escape vector. Richard made a quick decision. New heading, 180 Mark IV. Full impulse power. Let's see if we can lose them in the Cygnus Drift. The Cygnus Drift was a treacherous region of space filled with gravitational anomalies and radiation fields. Dangerous to navigate, but potentially more dangerous for their pursuers if they weren't familiar with the area. As the Artemis changed course, the Krell vessel followed, firing again. This time, their shot only grazed the shields, but it was enough to cause another round of systems failures. Captain, we've lost 30% of our power grid. The engineering officer reported over the comm. I've had to shut down non-essential systems to compensate. Understood. Focus power on engines and shields, Richard replied. As if on cue, the environmental controls in the bridge adjusted, the temperature noticeably dropping as the heating systems powered down to minimum levels. We're entering the drift, sir, Jackson announced. The Krell vessel is still in pursuit, but they're having trouble maintaining their targeting lock due to the interference. Good. Take us deeper in toward the Phantom Ridge. We'll use the gravitational distortions to mask our signature. For the next hour, the Artemis played a deadly game of hide and seek with the Krell vessel, weaving through the dangerous currents of the Cygnus Drift. Finally, as they emerged on the far side of a particularly dense radiation cloud, Jackson looked up with a relieved smile. No sign of pursuit, Captain. I think we lost them. Richard allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. Status report? Not good, sir, came the reply from engineering. We've sustained damage to multiple systems. The power grid is still operating at reduced capacity, and the hyperspace drive needs repairs before we can jump again. How long? At least 12 hours, maybe more. Richard nodded grimly. Set course for the Lazarus outpost. We'll make repairs there. Sir, Lazarus is a civilian mining station, Jackson pointed out. If we're trying to maintain a low profile. It's also the only friendly outpost within range, Richard interrupted. And right now, we need repairs more than we need secrecy. He stood up. I'll inform our passenger of the situation. You have the bridge, Lieutenant. As he made his way to Naren's quarters, Richard couldn't help wondering if this attack was just the beginning. Someone had known they were transporting Naren, which meant there was a leak somewhere in the Coalition command structure. The question was, how much did they know about their mission? When Naren opened her door, Richard was struck again by her alien beauty. She had removed her cloak, revealing more of her lavender skin with its subtle, shifting patterns that seemed to glow faintly in the dimmed lighting of her quarters. Her silvery hair was pulled back from her face, highlighting her delicate features and those remarkable silver eyes. Captain, she greeted him, her voice carrying that same musical quality he had noticed earlier. I felt the ship under attack. Are we safe? For the moment, Richard replied honestly. We've evaded our pursuers, but we've taken damage. We'll need to make a stop for repairs. Naren's expression tightened. That will delay our arrival at Proxima. I'm afraid so, yes. She turned away, moving to the small viewport that showed the swirling gases of the Cygnus drift outside. They found us quickly, she said quietly. Too quickly. You know who they are? Naren was silent for a long moment. Krell, she finally said. They have been hunting me for some time. Why? Richard asked, stepping closer. Who are you to them? She looked back at him, a sad smile playing on her lips. That information was not in your briefing? No. I was told to transport you to Proxima Station. Nothing more. Naren seemed to be weighing something in her mind before she spoke again. It is better that way, perhaps. The less you know, the safer you are. With all due respect, Richard said, my ship just came under attack. My crew is at risk. I think I deserve to know why. Her silver eyes searched his face, and Richard had the unsettling feeling she was seeing more than just his physical features. You are right, she conceded. But not now. After we reach this outpost and make repairs. There are things I must prepare. Before Richard could press further, the ship's communication system chimed. Captain, Jackson's voice came through. We're approaching Lazarus Outpost. They've granted us emergency docking privileges. Acknowledged, Richard replied. He turned back to Naren. We should reach the outpost within the hour. Please remain in your quarters until I come for you. It's safer that way. Naren nodded, though she didn't look pleased. As you wish, Captain. As Richard left her quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was far more to Naren's story than he could possibly imagine. And somehow, he suspected that whatever it was, it would change everything. The Lazarus Outpost was a grimy testament to humanity's stubbornness, a collection of habitation modules and mining equipment cobbled together around a small asteroid rich in rare minerals. It wasn't pretty, but it had the parts and facilities the Artemis needed to make repairs. While his engineering crew worked to restore the ship's systems, Richard made arrangements for temporary accommodations for those crew members whose quarters had lost life support. The outpost's administrator, a gruff woman named Vega, had been surprisingly accommodating once Richard explained their situation, or at least the version of it he could share. We've got enough rooms for your people, Vega had said. Not luxury suites, mind you, but they've got beds and heating, which is more than you've got right now from the sound of it. Thank you. Richard had replied sincerely. We shouldn't need them for more than a night or two. Now, as the station's artificial night cycle began, Richard found himself escorting Naren from the Artemis to one of the station's private guest chambers. He had debated leaving her aboard the ship, but decided against it when the engineering team reported they would need to shut down all remaining power to repair the main grid. I apologize for the accommodations, Richard said as they walked through the station's dimly lit corridors. It's not exactly what you're accustomed to, I imagine. Naren pulled her hood lower over her face, concealing her features from the few station residents they passed. I've stayed in far worse places, Captain, she replied softly. During my travels. They reached the door to her assigned quarters, and Richard pressed his palm against the scanner to unlock it. The door slid open, revealing a small but clean room with basic furnishings: a bed, a chair, a small table, and a tiny bathroom cubicle. "It's very cold," Naren observed as they stepped inside. Indeed, the room's temperature was noticeably lower than the corridor outside, a common issue in the outpost's older sections where the environmental systems were overtaxed. "I'll speak to the administrator about getting the temperature adjusted," Richard offered, but Naren shook her head. "No, drawing attention is unwise." She hugged her cloak tighter around herself. "I will manage." Richard frowned. "At least let me requisition an extra blanket for you." "That would be appreciated." An hour later, Richard returned with not only an extra blanket, but also a hot meal from the station's canteen. He found Naren sitting exactly where he had left her, perched on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in her cloak. Despite the room's dim lighting, he could see that her complexion had paled to a lighter shade of lavender, and the patterns on her visible skin seemed less vibrant. "Are you all right?" he asked, setting down the tray of food and the rolled-up blanket. "The cold affects my species more severely than it does humans," she admitted. "Our homeworld is considerably warmer than most coalition planets." Richard's concern grew as he noticed her slender hands trembling slightly. The Luminari were clearly not built for cold environments, and this room was far from comfortable even by human standards. He made a quick decision. "Wait here," he said. "I'll be right back." When he returned a few minutes later, he was carrying a military-grade thermal sleeping bag. His own, in fact, which he had brought from his quarters aboard the Artemis before the power shut down. "This should help," he said, unfurling the high-tech sleeping bag on the bed. "It's designed for survival in extreme conditions. Self-heating, insulated, the works." Naren looked at the sleeping bag, then back at Richard, genuine gratitude in her silver eyes. "Thank you, Captain." "Richard," he said, surprising himself. "When we're not on duty, you can call me Richard." A small smile touched her lips. "Richard," she repeated, the name sounding musical in her accent. "Try to get some rest," he advised. "I'll check on you in the morning. The engineers say we should be ready to depart by midday tomorrow." As he turned to leave, Naren's voice stopped him. "Richard? The Krell vessel. Do you believe they know we are here?" It was a question he had been asking himself since they'd arrived at the outpost. "I don't think so," he said honestly. "The Cygnus Drift's interference would have made it nearly impossible for them to track us. But we won't be staying any longer than necessary, just to be safe." She nodded, seeming relieved. "Good night, then." "Good night, Naren." Back in his temporary quarters, a storage room hastily converted to sleeping space, Richard found himself unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. His mind kept returning to Naren, to the mystery surrounding her, and to the attack by the Krell vessel. None of it made sense without more information, and she had promised to explain after they reached the outpost. Making up his mind, Richard got up and made his way back to Naren's quarters. It was time for some answers. When he reached her door, however, he hesitated. It was late, and she had been clearly exhausted. Perhaps this conversation could wait until morning after all. Just as he was about to turn away, he heard a sound from within the room, a soft whimper that might have been pain or distress. Concerned, Richard knocked gently. "Naren, are you all right?" No response came, but he heard another muffled sound. Worried that she might be ill or injured, he overrode the door lock with his captain's code and entered. The room was even colder than before, the station's environmental systems having cycled down for the night shift. In the dim light, he could see Naren curled up in the thermal sleeping bag, but something was clearly wrong. She was shivering violently, her face contorted in what looked like pain. "Naren!" Richard rushed to her side. "What's happening? Are you sick?" Her eyes fluttered open, the silver orbs clouded with distress. "Sea cold," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Too sea cold. My species. We cannot regulate body temperature like H-humans in extreme conditions." Richard touched her forehead and was alarmed to find her skin icy to the touch. Despite the thermal sleeping bag, she was experiencing something akin to hypothermia. The outpost's temperature must have dropped even further than he had anticipated. "We need to get you warm now," he said firmly. Without further hesitation, Richard made a decision that went against all protocol, but seemed like the only logical solution. "Move over," he instructed, unzipping the sleeping bag wider. Naren looked confused, but shifted to make room. Richard quickly slipped into the sleeping bag beside her, then zipped it closed again, trapping their combined body heat inside the insulated material. "Body heat is the most effective way to combat hypothermia," he explained, trying to keep his tone professional despite the intimate situation. "This should help raise your temperature." Thank you," Naren whispered, still shivering. Richard carefully put an arm around her, drawing her closer to share more warmth. He was acutely aware of the inappropriate nature of the situation. A coalition captain sharing a sleeping bag with a classified alien passenger. But the alternative was watching her health deteriorate further. Gradually, Naren's shivering began to subside as their shared warmth filled the sleeping bag. Richard could feel her body relaxing against his, her breathing becoming more regular. The patterns on her skin, which had been dim and sluggish, began to pulse with a soft, gentle light in the darkness of the room. "Your skin," Richard observed quietly. "It's glowing." "Yes," Naren replied, her voice stronger now. "It is a natural response when my body is functioning normally. The patterns are bioelectric in nature. They communicate my physiological state." "They're beautiful," Richard said honestly. There was a pause before Naren responded. "Among my people, such a comment would be considered quite intimate." Richard felt heat rise to his face. "I apologize if I offended." "No," she interrupted gently. It was not unwelcome. A comfortable silence fell between them. Richard was just beginning to think Naren had fallen asleep when she spoke again. "In my culture, sharing body heat is also considered an intimate act," she said softly. "But not in the way you might think. It is seen as an act of trust, of connection." Before Richard could respond, Naren shifted position slightly. To his utter astonishment, she began to unfasten the front of her garment. "What are you doing?" he asked, alarmed. "Maximizing heat transfer," she replied matter-of-factly. "Skin-to-skin contact is most efficient." Richard caught her hands, stopping her. "Naren, I don't think." "You misunderstand," she said, and there was a hint of amusement in her voice. "My species regulates temperature partially through specialized organs beneath our skin. Direct contact allows for better thermal equilibrium." She paused. "But I understand if this makes you uncomfortable by human standards." Richard hesitated. Everything about this situation was unprecedented, outside the boundaries of his training and experience. But Naren's health was his responsibility, and if this was what she needed, if it will help you recover faster, then do what you need to do, he said finally. Naren resumed unfastening her garment, revealing more of her lavender skin with its intricate patterns of light. Richard tried to maintain a respectful gaze, but it was difficult not to notice the differences between her physiology and human anatomy. Her torso featured similar contours to a human female's, but with subtle variations, most notably the patterned areas that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence in what appeared to be symmetrical designs across her chest and abdomen. "Now," she said, her voice taking on a more clinical tone, "for optimal thermal transfer, I need to establish direct contact with your core heat centers." Before Richard could process what she meant, Naren had placed both her hands directly on his chest, her touch cool at first but rapidly warming. More surprisingly, he felt a gentle, tingling sensation where her skin met his, as if a mild electric current was passing between them. "What's that sensation?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Bioelectric resonance," Naren explained. "My species can synchronize our electrical fields with others to accelerate healing and regulate bodily functions. It is a gift of the Luminari." The tingling intensified, spreading a pleasant warmth throughout Richard's chest and limbs. He found himself relaxing involuntarily, the tension of the day melting away under her touch. "This is," he began, finding it difficult to articulate the peculiar but not unpleasant sensation. "Unusual for you," Naren finished for him. "I understand, but it is helping to stabilize my core temperature." And, she added with a hint of surprise, It appears to be having a beneficial effect on you as well. Your stress hormones are decreasing. Richard couldn't deny it. He felt more relaxed than he had in weeks, despite the bizarre circumstances. Is this how your people normally interact? He asked curiously. Only with those we trust, Naren replied softly. It creates a bond, temporary but meaningful. In a sense, our life energies are communicating. As she spoke, the patterns of light beneath her skin shifted, forming new configurations that flowed like liquid light across her body. The effect was mesmerizing. Can you control those patterns? Richard asked. To some extent. They also respond automatically to emotions and physical states. She hesitated. Right now, they indicate that I am comfortable with you, that I trust you. The implications of her words weren't lost on Richard. She was sharing something intimate about her species, something that clearly wasn't included in the sparse briefing he had received. Naren, he said carefully, I think it's time you told me who you really are and why the Krell are hunting you. The luminous patterns on her skin dimmed slightly, reflecting her change in mood. For a long moment, she was silent, and Richard thought she might refuse again. But then she met his gaze, her silver eyes reflecting the soft light of her bioluminescence. Yes, she agreed quietly. You deserve to know the truth. Especially now. Naren took a deep breath, her hands still resting on Richard's chest, the bioelectric connection between them humming with energy. I'm not merely a Luminari, she began. I'm the daughter of High Chancellor Varen, leader of the Luminari Conclave. She paused, her eyes searching his for a reaction. My father was assassinated 3 weeks ago by Krell operatives. Richard's eyes widened. This was far beyond what he had imagined. The Coalition news networks didn't report anything about this. No, Naren agreed. The Conclave kept it secret while we determined who was responsible and why. We soon discovered that a faction within the Krell Empire had formed an alliance with traditionalist extremists among my own people, those who oppose our diplomatic relations with other species. But why target your father specifically? Because he was about to unveil a technological breakthrough to the Coalition Council, a clean energy source derived from our bioelectric abilities, amplified and harnessed on a scale that could power entire planets without depleting resources or causing environmental damage. Richard immediately grasped the implications. Such technology would render traditional fuel sources obsolete. Exactly. The Krell Empire's economy is built largely on energy production and trade. Our technology would devastate their power base. Naren's patterns shifted again, forming complex designs that seemed to convey deep emotion. But more than that, some among my own people fear that sharing this gift would dilute our cultural identity, make us too integrated with other species. So they allied with the Krell to prevent the technology from being shared, Richard concluded. Yes, they assassinated my father and seized control of the Luminari central government. Her voice grew harder, but they made one critical mistake. What was that? The technology cannot function without a specific genetic sequence, a biological key, if you will. And that key exists only in the royal bloodline. She held his gaze steadily. In me, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. You're not just being transported to Proxima Station, Richard realized. You're defecting, taking the technology to the Coalition. Not defecting, Naren corrected. I'm the rightful leader of my people now that my father is gone. I'm going to Proxima to meet with Coalition representatives who remain loyal to the alliance my father built, to expose the conspiracy and reclaim my position. And the Krell are hunting you because if they capture you, they can either force me to activate the technology for their exclusive use or ensure it never sees the light of day. Naren's expression was grim. Either outcome serves their interests. Richard absorbed this information in stunned silence. The woman lying beside him wasn't just an alien refugee. She was royalty, the key to a revolutionary technology, and the centerpiece of an interstellar conspiracy. No wonder Special Intelligence had been so secretive about her transport. Why are you telling me all this now? He finally asked. The patterns on Naren's skin shifted once more, forming a configuration Richard hadn't seen before, softer, more flowing. Because of this, she said, gesturing to the bioelectric connection between them, it is impossible for my kind to maintain this level of resonance with someone we do not trust completely. I did not plan for this to happen, but now that it has. She trailed off. Now that it has, Richard prompted, I believe you are meant to help me beyond simply transporting me to Proxima. Her silver eyes seemed to look into his very soul. The Luminari believe in cosmic synchronicity, that certain connections are destined. This resonance between us is rare, even among my own people. Richard found himself at a loss for words. His military training had never prepared him for anything like this. And yet, he couldn't deny the strange connection he felt to Naren, a connection that went beyond their unusual physical proximity. I'll help you in any way I can, he promised, though he wasn't entirely sure what that might entail. We'll get you to Proxima, and we'll make sure your message reaches the right people. Naren's expression softened with relief and gratitude. Thank you, Richard. As they lay there in the shared warmth of the sleeping bag, the glowing patterns of Naren's skin casting soft light in the darkness, Richard knew his life had irrevocably changed. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the simple existence of a coalition transport captain. What he didn't know was just how soon his newfound commitment would be tested. Morning arrived with the harsh buzz of Richard's communicator. He awoke disoriented, momentarily confused by the warm weight pressed against his side and the soft glow illuminating the dimness around him. Then memory rushed back. Naren, the sleeping bag, their midnight conversation. He carefully extracted his arm from around her sleeping form and retrieved the communicator from his pocket. Keller here, he answered quietly, trying not to wake Naren. Captain, Lieutenant Jackson's voice came through, tense and urgent. We have a situation. A Krell diplomatic vessel just docked at the station. Richard sat up abruptly, fully alert. Now, what? How? They claim to be on a routine diplomatic mission to the Cygnus sector, Jackson replied. But the timing is too convenient, sir. I don't believe in coincidences like this. Neither do I, Lieutenant, Richard said grimly. How many personnel did they bring aboard? 6. For security officers and 2 diplomats, according to their manifest. Station Administrator Vega granted them access under interstellar law. She had no reason to refuse. What's the status of our repairs? Chief Engineer Moretti reports we're at 80%. The power grid is back online, but the hyperspace drive still needs calibration. 3 more hours, minimum. That's 3 hours too long, Richard muttered. He glanced at Naren, who was now awake and listening intently, her luminous patterns pulsating with what he now recognized as anxiety. Maintain a security presence around our ship. No Krell personnel are to come aboard under any circumstances. I'll be there shortly. Understood, Captain. Richard ended the call and turned to Naren. We need to move. The Krell are here. They found us, she said, her voice tight with tension as she quickly refastened her garment. But how? I don't know, but we can't stay here. Richard's mind raced through their limited options. We need to get you back to the Artemis without being seen. The Krell have advanced scanning technology, Naren warned, pulling her cloak around her shoulders. They can detect Luminari biosignatures at close range. Richard frowned. Is there any way to mask your signature? Naren hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes, but it requires concentration. I can suppress my bioluminescence and electrical output temporarily, but not indefinitely. Perhaps long enough to reach your ship. Do it, Richard said. I'll create a diversion to keep their attention elsewhere. As Naren closed her eyes and began to focus, her skin's glowing patterns gradually dimmed until they were barely visible. Her lavender complexion seemed to dull as well, taking on an ashen quality that made her look ill. This is not comfortable, she said through gritted teeth, but I can maintain it for approximately 30 minutes. Richard nodded and checked the corridor through a small crack in the door. Empty for now, but that could change at any moment. He activated his communicator again. Jackson, I need a diversion. Something that will draw the Krell delegation to the station's central hub, away from the docking bays. I believe I can arrange that, sir, Jackson replied after a brief pause. Give me 5 minutes. While they waited, Richard outlined his plan to Naren. We'll take the maintenance tunnels that run beneath the main corridors. They lead directly to Docking Bay 7, where the Artemis is moored. Once aboard, we'll initiate emergency departure procedures. What about clearance from the station? Naren asked. We'll have to leave without it, Richard admitted. It'll mean fines and possibly disciplinary action when we return to Coalition space, but that's a problem for another day. Naren's hand found his in the dimness, her touch still carrying that faint electrical tingle despite her suppressed state. I'm sorry to place you in such a position. I made my choice, Richard replied simply. His communicator chimed. Diversion in progress, Jackson reported. Fire alert in Central Hub, Level 3. All station security responding, including our Krell visitors who seem particularly concerned about the proximity to sensitive areas. Good work, Lieutenant. We're moving now. Richard eased the door open and, confirming the corridor remained empty, led Naren quickly to a maintenance access panel a few doors down. He keyed in his captain's override code, and the panel slid open to reveal a narrow ladder descending into dimly lit service tunnels. Ladies first, he said with a wry smile. Naren climbed down nimbly, Richard following close behind. The tunnels were cramped, dusty, and poorly lit, perfect for their purposes. They moved as quickly as silence would allow, Naren's suppressed state making her blend into the shadows like a ghost. How much longer can you maintain this? Richard asked as they paused at an intersection to check their bearings. 10 minutes, perhaps 15, Naren replied, her voice strained. It becomes more difficult the longer I suppress. We're almost there, Richard assured her, pointing down the left passage. Docking Bay 7 is just beyond that bulkhead. They had just reached the final stretch when the station's alert system suddenly blared to life. Attention all personnel, came Administrator Vega's voice. We have reports of an unauthorized individual aboard the station. All civilians are to remain in their quarters. Security teams will conduct a thorough sweep. Richard and Naren exchanged alarmed glances. They know I'm here, Naren whispered. The suppression isn't working anymore. Indeed, Richard could see her patterns beginning to pulse visibly again despite her efforts to control them. We're too close to give up now, Richard said firmly. Come on. They reached the maintenance access point for Docking Bay 7 and found, to their dismay, 2 station security officers standing guard at the Artemis's boarding ramp. Plan B, Richard muttered. He activated his communicator again. Moretti, are you aboard? Yes, Captain, came the chief engineer's gruff voice. I need you to trigger an engineering emergency, something that requires the immediate assistance of any nearby personnel. There was a brief pause before Moretti replied with understanding in his voice. Aye, sir. One engineering emergency coming right up. Moments later, alarms began blaring from within the Artemis. Flashing red lights indicated a critical system failure, and a computerized voice announced, Warning, coolant leak detected. Explosion risk. All personnel clear the area. As Richard had hoped, the 2 security officers exchanged worried looks before sprinting away from the ship, calling for backup and evacuation procedures. Now, Richard urged, pushing open the access panel. They dashed across the docking bay and up the boarding ramp. Naren's hood pulled low over her face. Once aboard, Richard sealed the airlock behind them. Moretti, shut down those alarms and prepare for emergency departure. Lieutenant Jackson, get to the bridge and start pre-launch sequences. What about the docking clamps? Jackson asked through the comm. We'll override them. If necessary, we'll blow them. Richard led Naren quickly through the corridors of the Artemis toward the bridge. They had almost made it when a voice called out from behind them. That's far enough, Captain Keller. They turned to find Colonel Harris standing in the intersection, a disruptor pistol held casually at his side. Richard instinctively moved to place himself between Harris and Naren. Colonel, what are you doing here? Harris's expression was unreadable. I arrived on the last supply shuttle. When your ship failed to make its scheduled check-in, command became concerned. How convenient that you found us just as the Krell arrived, Richard said, his suspicion mounting. Harris sighed. You always were too perceptive for your own good, Keller. His gaze shifted to Naren. Princess Naren, I presume? Or should I say, High Chancellor now? You know who I am, Naren said coldly, and what I carry. Indeed. Harris gestured with his disruptor. I'm afraid I must insist you come with me. The Krell representatives are most eager to speak with you. Richard felt a cold fury building inside him. You're working with them. You set this whole thing up. Not initially, Harris admitted. The original plan was legitimate. Transport the princess to Proxima Station for her meeting with the Coalition Council. But when certain opportunities presented themselves, adjustments had to be made. You betrayed the Coalition, Richard said in disbelief. For what? Money? Power? For survival, Harris countered. The Krell offer me something more valuable than either. A cure. He pulled down his collar slightly, revealing a network of dark veins spreading up his neck. Delta radiation poisoning. Terminal. The Krell have medical technology the Coalition won't develop for decades. So you sell out your principles, your oath, and the future of interstellar peace for a few more years of life. Richard's voice was thick with contempt. Don't judge me until you're facing your own mortality, Captain, Harris snapped. Then he composed himself, gesturing with the disruptor again. Now, both of you will come with me. The Krell vessel is ready to depart. Richard's mind raced, calculating their options. They were still too far from the bridge to call for help, and Harris's disruptor would incapacitate him before he could make a move. But he had to try something. Colonel, think about what you're doing, he urged. The technology Naren carries could benefit billions of lives. It could transform entire worlds struggling with energy poverty. And it will, Harris replied. Under Krell management. They've promised to distribute it. Eventually, once they've secured their monopoly and political leverage, Naren interjected bitterly. My people will become nothing more than biological batteries for their empire. Harris shrugged. Political realities aren't always pleasant, Your Highness. As they spoke, Richard noticed something strange happening. The patterns on Naren's skin, visible at the edges of her cloak, were intensifying, pulsing with increasing brightness. More remarkably, he felt that same bioelectric tingle from their connection the previous night beginning to build between them, despite not being in physical contact. Naren's silver eyes met his briefly, conveying a silent message. She was preparing to do something, and he needed to be ready. The Krell will never honor their agreement with you, Richard continued, keeping Harris's attention. Once they have what they want, you're disposable. Perhaps, Harris conceded, but I'd rather take my chances with them than face certain death with the Coalition's inferior medical technology. His patience visibly thinning, he gestured sharply with the disruptor. Enough talk. Move. Naren chose that moment to act. With a sudden, fluid motion, she thrust both hands forward, her bioluminescent patterns blazing with brilliant light. A wave of blue-white energy surged from her fingertips, striking Harris before he could fire. The colonel froze in place, his body rigid, eyes wide with shock as bioelectric energy coursed through him. Now! Naren cried. Richard lunged forward, knocking the disruptor from Harris's paralyzed hand and catching the colonel as he collapsed, his nervous system temporarily overwhelmed by Naren's electrical discharge. I didn't know you could do that, Richard said, looking at Naren with new appreciation as he secured Harris's weapon. It is not an ability we advertise, she replied, her luminous patterns dimming as she recovered from the exertion. And it requires significant energy. I will need time to recuperate. You'll have it. Let's get to the bridge. When they arrived, Lieutenant Jackson and the bridge crew were already well into departure preparations. Their eyes widened at the sight of Naren's now fully visible alien features, but professional training kept them focused on their tasks. Status report, Richard commanded, taking his captain's chair. All systems operational, sir, Jackson responded. But Station Control is refusing our departure request, and the docking clamps are locked down under security override. And the Krell vessel? Still docked at Bay 12, but they're preparing to leave as well. Richard made his decision. Weapons to minimum power. Target the docking clamps only. Sir. Jackson looked uncertain. Do it, Lieutenant. We're leaving now. As Jackson complied, Richard turned to Naren, who had taken a seat at an unused console. Once we break free, the Krell will pursue. We need a destination beyond Proxima Station. Naren nodded, her expression resolute. The Luminari have a hidden outpost in the Veil Nebula. My father established it as a contingency. We will find allies there. The Veil is 3 days at maximum hyperspace velocity, Jackson noted. Then we'd better not waste any more time, Richard replied. Fire on the docking clamps. The Artemis's weapons discharged with surgical precision, severing the mechanical clamps that held them to the station. Alarms blared as emergency protocols activated, sealing the docking bay as atmosphere began to vent. Thrusters at full. Richard ordered, "Get us clear of the station." The Artemis pulled away from Lazarus Outpost, ignoring the frantic communications from station control. As they cleared the docking perimeter, long-range sensors detected the Krell vessel disengaging from its own berth. "They're pursuing, sir," Tomas reported from Tactical. "Weapons hot. Evasive maneuvers." "Moretti," Richard called to engineering, "we need that hyperspace drive now." "Working on the final calibrations, Captain," came the strained reply. 2 minutes. "We may not have 2 minutes," Jackson warned as the first Krell energy beam lanced past them, narrowly missing the starboard nacelle. Richard turned to Naren. "Is there anything else you can do? Any other abilities that might help us?" Naren hesitated, then moved to stand beside his chair. "There is one possibility, but it requires direct interface with your ship's systems. And your trust. You have it," Richard said without hesitation. "What do you need?" "Access to your navigation array and power distribution grid." Richard nodded to Jackson. "Lieutenant, give Her Highness full access." If Jackson was surprised by the title or the order, she didn't show it. "Aye, Captain." Access granted to Auxiliary Station 1. Naren moved quickly to the indicated console and placed her hands on the interface panel. Immediately, her bioluminescent patterns began to flow and shift, extending beyond her skin to create connections with the ship's systems. The bridge lights flickered as energy redistributed itself throughout the Artemis. "What's happening?" Richard asked, fascinated. "I am creating a bioelectric field around the ship," Naren explained, her voice strained with concentration. "It will mask our energy signature and create a false echo that should confuse their targeting systems." True to her word, the next Krell attack went wide, missing them by a substantial margin. The enemy vessel seemed to hesitate, its sensors clearly struggling to maintain a lock on the Artemis. "Hyperspace drive ready, Captain," Moretti announced triumphantly. "Set course for the Veil Nebula. Maximum velocity," Richard ordered. As Jackson inputted the coordinates, Naren suddenly gasped, her hands pressing harder against the console. "Wait, I can do more. If you allow me to directly interface with your drive system, I can enhance its efficiency, create a surge that will propel us farther and faster than your engines alone." Richard hesitated only briefly. "Do it." Naren's patterns intensified, spreading through the ship's computer systems like living electricity. On the engineering displays, power levels began to climb far beyond normal parameters, yet without any of the usual warning indicators of system strain. "Jump to hyperspace on my mark," Richard commanded. 3, 2, 1 mark. The stars outside elongated and then vanished as the Artemis leapt into hyperspace with unprecedented acceleration. The usual subtle vibration of hyperspace transition was replaced by a smooth, almost graceful entry that left even the experienced crew members looking impressed. When Naren finally removed her hands from the console, she was visibly exhausted, her luminous patterns dimmed to a faint glow. Richard moved quickly to support her as she swayed on her feet. "That was remarkable," he said as he helped her to a seat. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she replied with a tired smile. "The integration took more energy than anticipated, but I will recover." She looked up at the hyperspace patterns swirling outside the viewports. "They will not be able to follow our exact trajectory." The bioelectric surge created a unique hyperspace signature that cannot be replicated by conventional means. Richard turned to Jackson. "Lieutenant, what's our ETA to the Vale Nebula?" Jackson checked her instruments, then blinked in surprise. "At current velocity, just over 28 hours, sir. That's less than half the expected transit time." A collective murmur of amazement passed through the bridge crew. Richard felt a surge of pride in his ship, his crew, and especially in the extraordinary woman who had just demonstrated power beyond anything in Coalition experience. "Well done, everyone," he said. "Maintain hyperspace monitoring and alert me to any signs of pursuit." He turned back to Naren. "I think we need to talk more about this outpost and what we can expect when we arrive." Naren nodded. "Yes, but first, we should secure Colonel Harris. And I should rest or restore my energy." "Of course." As Richard escorted Naren from the bridge, he was keenly aware that they had just crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. They were no longer simply fleeing a Krell attack. They had directly opposed both Krell and, effectively, Coalition authority. They were now fugitives with an alien princess aboard, headed for a secret base in one of the most remote regions of known space. And yet, as he felt the faint electrical tingle where his hand supported Naren's elbow, Richard couldn't bring himself to regret any of it. The journey to the Vale Nebula was mercifully uneventful, with the Artemis traveling at unprecedented speed through hyperspace. They had outrun any potential pursuit. Richard had ordered Colonel Harris confined to the brig underguard, though the colonel had said little since his capture, refusing to answer questions about his Krell collaborators or the extent of the conspiracy. In the privacy of Richard's quarters, Naren had explained more about their destination. The Luminari outpost, hidden within the dense gases and stellar debris of the Vale Nebula, had been established by her father as a research facility where their scientists could work without political interference from traditionalist factions. "The outpost is shielded by technology similar to what I use to mask our ship," she explained. "Unless you know exactly where to look and possess Luminari physiology to activate the entrance protocols, it cannot be detected." "Who will we find there?" Richard asked. "Scientists mostly, along with a small security contingent loyal to my father, and now to me, and possibly representatives from other species who were working with my father on implementing the energy technology across different physiologies." Now, as the Artemis approached the coordinates Naren had provided, Richard stood on the bridge, watching the spectacular swirls of colorful gases that gave the Vale Nebula its name. The nebula was a supernova remnant, the aftermath of a massive stellar explosion thousands of years ago, and its intricate tendrils of ionized gas created one of the most beautiful natural phenomena in the galaxy. "I'm not detecting any structure or facility," Jackson reported, studying her sensor readings with a frown. "You won't," Naren said calmly. She had recovered her strength during the journey, her luminous patterns once again flowing vibrantly beneath her skin. "Reduce speed and allow me to guide us in." Richard nodded. Helm dropped to 1/4 impulse power. As the Artemis slowed its approach, Naren moved to the navigation console and again placed her hands on the interface. Her patterns began to pulse in a specific rhythm, and a beam of bioenergetic light projected from her fingertips into the ship's systems. "I'm transmitting the recognition code," she explained. "It is not electronic or quantum-based, but bioelectric, impossible to intercept or duplicate." For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, a section of the nebula directly ahead seemed to ripple and part, revealing a previously invisible passage through the dense gases. "Remarkable," Jackson breathed. "Some kind of selective permeability field, combined with targeted perception filtering," Naren confirmed. "It affects both sensors and organic vision. Follow the passage I've revealed. It will lead us to the docking area." Richard gave the order, and the Artemis moved forward into the hidden corridor through the nebula. The gases around them glowed with ethereal light in shades of purple, blue, and green, occasionally punctuated by brighter flares of energy from within the nebula structure. After several minutes of careful navigation, the passage widened, revealing their destination, and the sight left the entire bridge crew speechless. Suspended within the heart of the nebula was a vast structure unlike anything in coalition architecture. Rather than the angular, utilitarian designs favored by human engineers, the Luminari outpost resembled a massive crystalline lotus, its petals forming graceful curves that opened outward from a central hub. The entire structure pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns that adorn Naren's skin, scaled up to monumental proportions. Between the petals, smaller structures drifted in perfect geometric patterns, connected by threads of light that shifted and moved like living things. "Welcome," Naren said with quiet pride, "to Horizon Haven." "It's incredible," Richard managed to say. "I've never seen anything like it." "Few outsiders have," Naren replied. "This is the future my father envisioned. A perfect integration of biological and technological systems, powered by clean, renewable energy drawn from the nebula itself. A model for what could be implemented throughout Coalition space." As they watched, several of the energy threads extended toward the Artemis, forming a network around the ship that guided them toward one of the larger petals, which was opening to reveal a docking bay within. "They're scanning us," Jackson reported, "but it doesn't feel like any scan I've experienced before. It's almost gentle. Luminari technology doesn't force itself upon other systems," Naren explained. "It requests permission and integrates harmoniously. You're feeling the difference between dominance and cooperation in technological form." The Artemis was drawn smoothly into the docking bay, which closed behind them like a flower folding its petals for the night. When the ship settled into its berth, the docking mechanisms attached themselves without any mechanical sound, energy fields rather than physical clamps securing the vessel in place. "Power down all systems except life support," Richard ordered. "Let's not tax our host's hospitality with unnecessary energy usage." As the crew complied, a communications signal chimed, not through the ship's standard channels, but somehow directly through the console nearest Naren. "They're ready to receive us," she said, turning to Richard. "A delegation is waiting in the arrival chamber." Richard nodded, then addressed his crew. "Lieutenant Jackson, you have command of the Artemis. Maintain standard security protocols, but extend every courtesy to our hosts. I'll accompany Princess Naren to meet the delegation." "Princess," one of the junior officers whispered, eyes widening. "I'll explain everything later," Richard promised. "For now, know that we've become involved in something much larger than a simple transport mission, something that could change the balance of power throughout known space." As Richard and Naren prepared to disembark, he couldn't help but reflect on how completely his life had changed in just a few short days. From a routine coalition captain to a fugitive harboring an alien princess, now standing on the threshold of a secret base hidden in the heart of a nebula. All because he had offered to share his sleeping bag with a shivering alien girl one cold night on a mining outpost. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments led to the most extraordinary journeys. The arrival chamber of Horizon Haven was a soaring space with walls that curved upward to form a dome of what appeared to be living crystal. The material pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns that characterized Luminari physiology, creating an ever-changing tapestry of light and color that illuminated the chamber without any visible lighting fixtures. Waiting to greet them was a small delegation of Luminari, their lavender skin and luminous patterns instantly identifying them as Naren's people. Leading them was an older female whose patterns were particularly complex and bright, flowing across her exposed skin in intricate designs that spoke of wisdom and authority. "High Chancellor Naren," the elder Luminari greeted with a formal bow, her voice carrying the same melodic quality as Naren's but with greater resonance. "We received your coded transmission. The Haven stands ready to serve." Naren returned the bow. "Elder Sereth, it brings me joy to see you well. May I present Captain Richard Keller of the Coalition vessel Artemis, who has risked everything to ensure my safe passage here." Elder Sereth turned her silver gaze to Richard, studying him with an intensity that made him feel as though she could see through to his very soul. "Captain Keller," she said finally, The Luminari people owe you a debt that cannot easily be repaid. You have preserved not only our future leader, but the hope of countless worlds. Richard bowed respectfully. I did what I believed was right, Elder. No debt is necessary. A smile touched Saratha's lips. And that, Captain, is precisely why such a debt exists. She gestured to the others in the delegation. These are the leaders of our research teams. They have continued your father's work in his absence, Naren, and have made significant progress. Progress is exactly what we need, Naren replied earnestly. The situation has become critical. Colonel Harris's betrayal suggests the conspiracy extends deeper into coalition leadership than we feared. Sarath nodded gravely. Kulme, the council chamber is prepared. We have much to discuss. As they followed the delegation through the breathtaking interior of Horizon Haven, Richard marveled at the seamless integration of biology and technology. The very walls seemed alive, responding to the presence of the Luminari with subtle changes in light and color. Pathways formed and reformed as needed, and doors opened without commands or controls of any kind. It's all bioelectrically controlled? He asked Naren quietly. Yes, she confirmed. The entire structure is, in a sense, alive, grown rather than built, and maintained through a symbiotic relationship with its inhabitants. It draws energy from the nebula and from us, and in return, provides everything we need. It's extraordinary, Richard said, genuinely awed. The implications for sustainable habitats alone are revolutionary, let alone the energy applications. Exactly what my father believed, Naren replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. He saw how many worlds struggle with resource limitations and environmental damage from conventional power sources. Our gift could transform billions of lives. They arrived at the council chamber, a circular room with a living table at its center, another piece of the crystal-like material that formed the structure. Around it were gathered not only Luminari, but representatives of other species as well, including several humans whom Richard didn't recognize. Elder Sarath called the meeting to order, and Naren took a position at the head of the table, her rightful place as High Chancellor. Richard was directed to a seat at her right hand, a position of honor that wasn't lost on him. Friends and allies, Naren began, her voice carrying newfound authority. I come to you with grave news. My father's assassination was indeed part of a coordinated effort between Krell operatives and traditionalist elements among our own people. But the conspiracy extends further than we initially believed, reaching into the highest levels of coalition command. She detailed Colonel Harris's betrayal and the attack on the Artemis, as well as their narrow escape from Lazarus Outpost. The council members listened in grim silence, exchanging troubled glances as the implications became clear. If Coalition's special intelligence has been compromised, one of the human representatives said, then we cannot rely on official channels to expose this conspiracy. Precisely why we are here, Sarath agreed. Horizon Haven was established for exactly this contingency, a place beyond the reach of those who would misuse our gifts or prevent their sharing. But we cannot hide forever, another council member, a blue-skinned Arcturian, pointed out. The technology must be implemented broadly to have the impact Chancellor Varen envisioned. And it will be, Naren assured them. But first, we must secure our position and identify who remains trustworthy within the coalition leadership. The discussion continued for hours, with detailed reports on the technological development, political maneuvering, and strategic options. Throughout it all, Richard was struck by Naren's transformation. The vulnerable woman he had shared his sleeping bag with had been replaced by a confident leader, commanding respect from beings far older and more experienced than herself. Her luminous patterns seemed to reflect this change, flowing with purpose and determination. When the council finally adjourned for a brief recess, Naren drew Richard aside, into a small alcove away from the others. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. For what? Richard asked, genuinely puzzled. For involving you in this. For putting your career, your life at risk. Her patterns shifted to convey what Richard now recognized as regret. You become a fugitive because of me. Richard shook his head. I made my own choices, Naren, and I'd make them again. She studied his face intently. Why? You barely knew me. You had no reason to trust me over your own superior officer. Richard considered the question carefully. At first, it was simply the right thing to do, protecting someone who needed help. But now, he hesitated, searching for the words to express the complex emotions he had developed. Now, I believe in what you're trying to do. The potential of this technology to change lives, to transform worlds for the better, it's worth fighting for. Naren's expression softened, and her patterns shifted again to the flowing, gentle configuration he had seen in their most intimate moments. Is that the only reason, Richard? The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Richard found himself unable to maintain the professional distance he had been trying to preserve since their arrival at Horizon Haven. No, he admitted quietly. It's not the only reason. Before he could elaborate, one of the Luminari researchers approached urgently. High Chancellor, we've detected unusual energy fluctuations in the nebula. Something's approaching, something large. They hurried back to the council chamber, where a holographic display now showed the space surrounding Horizon Haven. Within the swirling gases of the nebula, several dark shapes were moving with purpose, converging on their location. Krell warships, Richard identified immediately, recognizing their distinctive silhouettes. At least 5 of them, heavy cruiser class. How did they find us? One of the council members demanded. This facility is supposed to be undetectable. They must have followed our hyperspace trajectory, Richard realized. Even with Naren's modifications, they could have calculated probable destinations within the nebula. Or there's another traitor, Sareth suggested grimly. Naren's expression hardened. It doesn't matter how they found us. What matters is what we do now. She turned to the Luminari research team. Is the prototype ready? The lead researcher, a male Luminari with intricate circular patterns, nodded hesitantly. Theoretically, yes, but it's never been tested at full capacity and without the proper calibration sequence. I am the calibration sequence, Naren reminded him. My genetic pattern is the key that activates the full potential. She turned to Richard. Captain, I'll need your help. Your military experience and knowledge of Krell tactics will be invaluable. Whatever you need, Richard promised. Then let's proceed to the core chamber, Naren decided. Elder Sareth, begin evacuation protocols for non-essential personnel. If this fails, they should be ready to depart in the emergency vessels. As they hurried through the living corridors of Horizon Haven, Richard asked, what exactly is this prototype? A large-scale application of our bioelectric technology, Naren explained. In theory, it can generate an energy field capable of disabling any conventional power system without harming organic life. A perfect defensive weapon, it neutralizes threats without destroying them. Like a massive electromagnetic pulse, but selective. Similar in concept, but far more sophisticated. It doesn't simply overload electronics. It temporarily rewrites the energy patterns within them, rendering them inoperable until the effect dissipates. They arrived at the core chamber, a vast spherical space at the center of Horizon Haven. In the middle hung what appeared to be a crystalline orb about 3 meters in diameter, suspended by threads of pure energy. The orb pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns as the Luminari themselves, but with an intensity that almost hurt to look at directly. The heart of Luminera, Naren said reverently. The culmination of my father's work. The research team was already there, making frantic adjustments to various control interfaces. The lead researcher approached Naren anxiously. High Chancellor, I must emphasize that this is highly experimental. We've never channeled this much energy through the system before. The risks are necessary, Naren finished firmly. We have no choice, Dr. Alarian. Prepare the interface. As the team worked, Richard studied the tactical display showing the approaching Krell vessels. They're moving into attack formation, he observed. Classic encirclement pattern. They'll be within weapons range in less than 10 minutes. Then we have 8 minutes to activate the heart, Naren said decisively. She turned to Dr. Alarian. Is it ready? The scientist nodded. Reluctantly. The interface is prepared, but High Chancellor, the amount of bioelectric energy required. It will drain you severely, possibly to dangerous levels. Understand the risks, Naren replied. She took Richard's hand, her touch conveying that familiar electrical tingle, but stronger now, more focused. Whatever happens, Richard, know that what we shared was real and precious to me. Before Richard could respond, Naren released his hand and stepped onto a platform directly beneath the suspended orb. Immediately, tendrils of energy extended from the orb, connecting with the luminous patterns on her skin. Naren gasped.